Welcome to the latest edition of Women and Films. I am Kemi Oshukoya. From the mid-50s to the end of apartheid in South Africa, a group of Africans on the continent and in the diaspora, among them Kwame Nkrumah, Chief Obafemi Awolowo, and Aribola Fenti, collaborated to liberate African nations from colonialism. Their collective effort led to the independence of several African nations, including Ghana and Nigeria. They were hailed and known as hero and pioneer by their fellow citizens. Missing from the historical narrative are the story of Caribbeans like Hugh Cross, a Trinidadian who worked alongside this African pioneer to liberate African and Caribbean nations from colonialism. A story and others like him serve as a premise for a feature documentary film titled Hero by British Trinidadian filmmaker Francis Anne Solomon. The film was shown at this year's New York African Film Festival, which took place at the Lincoln Center in New York. I sat down with the filmmaker and the founder of the festival, Ms. Bonetti, to talk about how the film encapsulates the theme of this year's festival.
The theme of this year's festival is Beyond Borders, Storytelling Across Time. And under this banner, we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of FESPACO, which is the Pan-African Film and Television Festival that takes place every 2 years in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso. And we're also celebrating the 100th anniversary of the Pan-African Congress that was launched. I think it was the second edition in 1919 in Paris. And then also we're commemorating the 25th anniversary of the Rwanda genocide. And so if we take all of these three sub-themes into consideration, they span over 100 years. And it also goes across all these different continents, just like the film Hero, the extraordinary life and times of Yuri Cross. And her film, for me, anchors all these things. As I was saying, all these movements, Pan-African Congress, the FESPACO, this is when African and diaspora, that intersection where they meet and they're dreaming of something greater for their people, their continent, and for their freedom, for their independence. And so this is, I felt, was the year that we should really revisit these topics.
Bringing the vision to life means piecing together a historical archive in order to build a bridge between generations through storytelling.
When we were sort of programming or thinking of the program for this year's festival, we always look at what is a historic moment, a landmark moment, a milestone, and we try to create a story around these milestones and landmark moments, because we're also telling a story through the programming. And we were very fortunate to know of Francis's film, which for me is the title in the entire festival that encapsulates all these themes. It tells us it's the Pan-African story, the story of independence, the story of activism, the story of never servitude, but also always fighting for our freedom, for our self-expression, for our, how would you say, our collective. Yes.
Francis, tell us a little bit about your film and now what drew you to work on that project?
Well, the film started with my mom. She got a call from a friend of hers who was dying, and he told her that he wanted her to make this film about Ulrich Cross, who was another friend of ours. And then I, as the filmmaker in the family, I got involved to help my mother, really. And it became the mandate of the ancestors to get this film made. But what blew me away when I began to research this man's life was that it tied together so many pieces. It joined the dots, and that all of us have know a piece of this story. As people in the African diaspora, we all know in our kind of not so distant past, we know people who were part of the independence movement, who were part of the liberation movements, who were part of that incredible time, a kind of moment in time in the 50s and 60s where there was a vision of freedom, of self-governance, it was a very hopeful time, and people were working together and believing in a bigger collective vision, and that whole, it sort of got lost for many of us, and so it was amazing to unearth it and then to tell that story.
And what did you learn in the process, and how does it relate to what is going on presently in our society?
Well, it's a tragedy that we never were able, as people of the African diaspora, to come together and create, a collective or a federation where we could all help to rebuild Africa. I mean, or rebuild, ourselves, really. You look at the whole idea, that incredible idea that they had of forming not just a Pan-Africanism, but a United States of Africa, that people from the African diaspora from all over the world would come together and help rebuild Africa. That all of us who had been taken from Africa in chains 400 years before, that we could all come back and help to build this beautiful vision. And the thing is that it stands so close to the idea of the United States of America, which is the biggest empire in the world. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like we could have a common currency, we could have free trade between countries, we could have, peaceful negotiations of borders. We could build our resources and own our resources. It's not far-fetched. Well, I think people should grieve.
Why?
The loss of that idea.
Why?
Because it never happened. It didn't come to pass. Our ambitions were thwarted by those who had a vested interest in making sure that we never owned and controlled our own countries and our own identities.
This is the 26th anniversary. When you started the festival 26 years ago, what was the response like?
Well, first of all, no one believed it was possible. Even I did not realize the body of work that existed of people of African descent and Africans telling their own stories. But I just want to pick up from something Frances Ann was saying. This is the moment she was speaking of. I was a child. I was born during that time. I saw the process unfold in real time. And even today, I wish I could thank my parents. I wish I could, wherever they are, I'm hoping that they're proud that I'm doing this, because I lived that moment.
Yeah.
That's who informed who I am.
Yeah.
When the Biafra War happened, there were 3 Nigerian students in my house. There were 2 South African students in my house who my parents were, everyone shared. There were ANC chapters around,
exactly.
the non-aligned nations, Nasser, the Bandung conference.
Exactly.
I lived that moment, so I saw that collective happening. They were really educated and sophisticated people.
Exactly.
Anyone under 45 has not seen that
Exactly.
Africa that I saw.
Yeah.
Our dream was deferred. Let's put it that way. Our dream got deferred, And what happened is that there was so much, it was like euphoric that moment,
Exactly.
And actually I collect a lot of the archival films from that moment, and then I also sourced the Russian archives just to see, piecing together that history and trying to juxtaposition it for people who have never, or who don't believe that even existed, And so for me, that is why I love the cinema. It's as I was saying, it's a quick study for me, and I feel it's a quick study for all of us, because maybe we can recapture something and pick up that thread.
Exactly.
Somehow,
I think that's the point.
you know?
Yes.
Yes.
It's to go to find the optimism and the vision and bring it to young people, and so that they have both a sense of history and a sense of purpose.
Exactly. And so in fact, it leads into the question you just asked, what was the reaction at the time? I think the reactions is still today. A lot of people walked out of a film and said, I did not know that. I just knew. You maybe heard of George Padmore. You hear of this other, or you hear of Nelson Mandela, or you hear of Kwame Nkrumah. But they're all those people who were standing at the front line, who took the bullet for them, and those are the heroes as well, you know. And this is what I love about the cinema. It's a quick study. We're learning. We have multiple stories, not one story we get, you know. That's why we'll never run out of stories. That's why I love this. You know, we are born storytellers, okay.
Africans.
We come from Africans are born storytellers. We come from an oral tradition, and that was not written down. So the cinema is preserving that or recapturing that in a way.
And how do you hope for your vision for the next coming year, for the next 26 years? What are you hoping that the festival will continue to do?
Well, I'm hoping that, I think right now, I want to believe this century is ours for the taking. How about that? So it's up to us to decide whether we want to take it and how we want to take it. And I am doing this work not for someone to validate me or her or you. I'm doing this work so we can look at ourselves and say, okay, this is what we need to fix, but also celebrate what we have given and achieved, and know that we have the right to sit at the table when the discussion is about us and be part of that discussion. So this century is ours for the taking, and how we're going to take it, and how we're going to heal ourselves first, love ourselves, love each other, and that is the power we need in order to hold on to this century and make our people and our continents and our communities, you know, be what they were meant to be.
A lot of African countries, including Ghana, have recently launched new programs to encourage African American, to return and help rebuild some of what is going on in the continent. What do you think about that, both of you?
I think our time is coming.
Yes.
I do. I think it's changing. Like even in my lifetime, I've seen, going from just, as you say, disconnect, kind of ignorance of the connections between us. When I was a child, people in my country never said they were Africans. They would say, I'm Trinidadian. And they would identify with England. But they would laugh at Africa. I wanted to deal with that in the film. They would laugh about Africans. They didn't want to be identified as Africans. That's no longer the case. We're seeing, like you said, when I went to Ghana, a lot of Ghanaians saw us as they saw me as a white person, first of all, and then they saw us as being outsiders, as being foreigners, not as people who were coming home because our blood relatives were taken, involuntarily, that we had a connection that is so deep, that we are family. I think the fact that the Ghanaian government now is inviting people to come home is a great step, because that's a public statement. It means everybody in Ghana is aware that we are connected. And I feel that is, I'm really sensing there's a huge kind of tectonic shift in how people of the African diaspora and the continent see each other.
You mentioned that when you were in Ghana, people treated you a different way. How did you? A lot of people have also mentioned that. Tell us how did you feel about that?
I don't care. My grandfather was one of the architects of independence in the Caribbean. I'm a black person.
Yeah.
And anybody who knows me knows